The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Planted with Sara Pine. I'm Sara Pine, your host, and today we have On the Revel's Chief Impact Officer, Jason Starr, on the show. Jason has over 15 years of experience as an attorney, educator, and strategist in the fight for human rights, and I am so darn excited to have him on the show today and to hear more about his work and what's going on the other coast, because I am over in California. So Jason, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Greetings from the People's Republic of Brooklyn, New York.
Yes.
Happy to be here with you.
I am so excited to dig into things. When I was reading your bio, I was just like, wow, talk about all the intersections that we want to get into when we're talking about cannabis and politics and human rights and all these things. So I'm just thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so
And before
much.
we dig into all of that meaty stuff, I'd like to ask you the question I ask all my guests.
Great question, and one that I knew was coming, so I thought about it a little bit ahead of time. And it actually, I mean, this, not uncommon, I think, but it was at a house party in high school. And the backstory is I'm a very curious, we'll try it kind of person, and always have been. But I grew up in South Carolina. I grew up in a sort of conservative, very religious community, and like one where there was definitely that stigma that we see around cannabis, really substance, any kind of substance, but particularly cannabis. It's like a place where reefer madness really had taken hold and not really left. And I was perceived to be like this, like the really smart, driven. They're like, oh, he makes good grades. He's like going somewhere. And I think I remember being at this party and someone was like passing around a joint or a blunt or something. And it was like, oh, do you want it? And I was like, well, I never tried it before, but yeah, let's do it. And I felt like the whole party kind of stopped and was like, Jason Starr? And I tell that backstory just to say it was like kind of the first time I like sort of understood that stigma really meant for some people, like using cannabis, experiencing the plant was somehow like inconsistent with academic achievement at that time or being a responsible person. And so that really sat with me and has sat with me, of course, as I've moved through growing up and continuing to have a wonderful relationship with with the plant.
It's funny. It's like I always wanted to say, like, good kids get curious,
Yeah, I think that's what made me a good kid.
right?
Yeah, trying to, you know, um, not close myself off to um, experiences that, were unfamiliar, right? And being confident that, you know, I was still gonna rock it out of that little town and make something of myself. So and then, of course I was able to disrupt this thing that in my own mind about people who use drugs, myself, and just the relationship, obviously, that our country and our public policy has had to the plant, and of course learning and discovering again as I grew up, going to college and into my career, about the kinds of what I call state violence, policy violence that was wrought on communities, and then being able to look back at family members and other people and make those connections, like, well, that was really happening to them, but I didn't have the prism or vision to see it as a young person, but really appreciating that so much of the work that I do now has been formed by that and like grounded in that. So it's my own little experience there. I didn't suffer nearly as many direct consequences, but certainly could identify with that narrative and with the stories that came to inform my career.
Yeah, I think it's a really eye-opening thing when we get old enough to be able to unpack a lot of those stigmas and realize some of this, most of this, was a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah, and really strategically designed to um, accomplish a political and a policy goal. When I do my sort of like cannabis 101s, which is a big part of legalization, and I know sometimes that gets lost because we move right into like how do we get licenses and how do we get the business set up, and we sort of forget that prohibition was also the robbing of knowledge. And so we got to fill that knowledge gap as much as we have to fill things like capital gaps for small business owners and those kinds of things to make the industry equitable. And I always sort of start back in the US with how Chinese folks in San Francisco and Oakland and how the prohibition of opium was used to really segregate and exclude a population of people who, at that time, the majority deemed undesirable and un-American, right? Same thing with Mexicans in certain parts of the country when it came to cannabis, and certainly we can move that history or thread that needle through all the way to urban communities, which I think really grounded, obviously, here in New York and elsewhere, some of the political energy around legalization. Certainly here in New York, it was a direct result or an outgrowth, I think, of criminal justice reform policy, right? And so yeah, just kind of waking up, the third eye opening to how this was a tool, a political tool for racism, and also then understanding the plant and its benefits and saying, oh my God, we were criminalized, our communities were drained of resources, all of those things, but also there's so much that knowledge of the plant and its uses and applications could do that we also just haven't had an opportunity to avail ourselves of, and that's been a real loss for everybody.
Yeah, it certainly has. It's really interesting how, and not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist by any stretch of the imagination, but when you look at the things that are prohibited and the reasons that are manufactured for it, and then you look at the social constructs that we see that harm others, and then you
Mm.
start to realize that a lot of this is to benefit a very small amount of people. There are people who are being enriched by racism being alive and well and having people not like one another and want to harm one another and keep people from opportunities. And I think it's a conversation that we need to like really dive into because especially in these past few years, I mean, we've always had issues with this, but it's really when people have felt safe to come out and have a lot of hatred and really talk. I mean, I can't. I've been stunned into silence with some of the things that have come out of people's mouths that I've never expected. And it really is a call to the fact that we need to have more critical thought and more healing and be like, hey, wait a minute. You've been manipulated to have these feelings and create this blame when the blame isn't there. Like, look within, and realize
Yeah,
that you've been manipulated because someone's actually making money off of your bad thoughts.
right. I mean, the America's an audacious project, right? I mean, it's this huge continental country, and there isn't really much that ties us together in ways that maybe characterizes like other countries. Like we don't really have a shared ethnic heritage. We don't have a shared geographic, heritage. We are this e pluribus unum, right? Like out of many one, right? This
Mm-hmm.
idea that you can history and birth a new country that is a pluralistic democracy that has sort of that is tied together by these very high-minded ideals. So in theory, it's great, right? But I think the point you're making is when the incentives and the motives for how we sustain ourselves and grow and move forward get corrupted,
Mm-hmm.
when things like housing and healthcare become the products of hypercapitalism and not like human rights, when our relationship to things like cannabis is driven not by health, wellness, and science, but by the need to segregate and aggregate power, then I think what we're experiencing now is kind of the consequences, right, of all of that and the fissures. We're looking for that thing that ties us together, and not necessarily believing that we can actually collectively achieve those high-minded ideals. So that's me. I'm like struggling with like maintaining that like I would like to think of myself as a communitarian, but kind of confronted with we worked ourselves into a mess, and so like how do we get people to still like believe in that ideal,
Yeah.
especially masses, right? Not the Elon Musk of the world.
I know. They can buy all the experiences that they want and surround themselves in their echo chambers, whereas
Right.
the rest of us have to navigate this world and find ways to make it a quite honestly a more loving place.
I always thought about cannabis policy as like a hopeful place of work. And I'm a civil rights generalist, if you will, although the majority of my practice now is in gender and sexuality. But previously, like I came into sort of the cannabis policy space through my work at the ACLU of New York. And like I said, I mean, we'd really been working on stop and frisk and those kinds of things, and
Hmm.
really um, I feel like everyone in the policy world talks about data now, but sort of back then in 2011, data wasn't. It was a road we were getting onto an end and not an end in of itself. But we started to analyze a lot of the data around the relationship between stop and frisk and cannabis prohibition, and unsurprisingly, right, like the vast majority of these low level stops were occasion they were cannabis related, right? And so we were able to really ride on that narrative, that it was really young Black and brown folks who were getting stopped, that disproportionately, and that the stated goal, right, to be able to keep weapons off the street were not the outcomes. Less than 1% of those stops was producing. So 800, 900,000 individual stops a year, 80 or 90% of them young Black and brown. Well, what was the ultimate charge, if anything, and the majority of those being low level cannabis, especially when we had decriminalized in 1977. I think that really opened the door to have an entirely different conversation about what legalization would do to New York communities and to individuals in New York, be it federal housing through, whether it's public housing or public housing vouchers, um, education and education funding. There's just so many ways in which lives and communities were being destroyed. And that data really we were able to develop a narrative that really got more people talking about why this was like critically important. Um, and then, of course, then thinking about what the potential economic reparative opportunities um, there were. So I'd like to think of it as a place where some of these big questions that I was talking about before that we can actually play around with in this industry and in this
Mm.
work, and maybe like extrapolate those out to other places, because this is an opportunity, like once in a generation opportunity for us to kind of birth something new. We're not pretending that prohibition and its consequences aren't there, and we are building out of those. But I do love that we have an opportunity to think about reparative public policy and try things in this space in ways that I think is more challenging in other places where the table's set so firmly already, if that makes sense.
It does. It totally does. We had a lot of conversations about that here in California, especially during the medicinal times of 215 days, because it was really, really ripe for planting those kinds of seeds. You know, we were looking at the fact that you could create abundance, but also give back to your community and create, you know, generational wealth and opportunities for people. And, you know, and we were also talking about how to create safe places for people to consume, because as we know, if you're in Section 8 housing and you get caught with
Right.
cannabis, you can lose your home. So
Yeah.
how were we able to do things like that, or for people who are critically and chronically ill, how are they able to get cannabis at reduced rates or donate it? Because we have a lot of activists here in California that are doing the compassion programs. And even with, you know, how depressed the industry is here, people still want to give. And I really like, it's something that I see this generosity and this big heartedness in a lot of our colleagues, that they want to make this change. And we have a lot of work to do to kind of push back the norms of corporate business that's coming in. I mean, there are a lot of people who are coming in that have great skill sets and do have heart, that are coming from corporate. But then we have people who are coming in with the old tropes of how we do business, third verse, same as the first. And it's
Hmm.
like, let's change this. And like you said, let's use this as a model to change other areas in our country, in the world, and how people do business, to create a more generous place that creates abundance for everybody. And it's really not, it's not like I'm sitting here singing kumbaya. It's like, it's a reality that this can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, we were really, you know, bullish on an equity first model in New York. And at the time, I think we were, you know, the first state that was affirmatively legislating. You know, there was the ballot initiatives in the states out west, and of course, the legislature coming back and legislating behind a public mandate. And we didn't make it across the finish line first. Illinois and New Jersey, you know, beat us to the punch. But you know, we were in this unique position, and I was in the governor's office, and I had the file at the time. But we were in this unique position where you know it's 2018 ish, and so we had you know about 5 or 6 years of legal market from California, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and then, of course, Massachusetts kind of coming online. And I think some of the other big states, New York, Illinois, you know, moving in that direction. So everyone wanted to talk to us. So to the first point, you know, that spirit of kind of collaboration that may be a little inconsistent with like corporate business practices in other areas. We felt that from the beginning because the regulators from other states. I remember going to my first regulators conference, and they were like, oh my God, we got to dump everything. Because they looked at it as you have an opportunity, right? Like we got pulled into this, and you know, we had to create a structure behind a ballot measure, and we were had the benefit of a blank sheet of paper, if you will, right? And legislating forward. And so we had an opportunity for to kind of pick up all of these like really great things from across these early states and also learn from the things that like didn't actually work.
Yes.
And and so we pulled together a bill, right, that you know I think did a lot of really sort of equities forward things, but one thing was really try to ground early market entry into the framework. Now that's tough, and I think we're seeing the consequences of some of that, and we're seeing some of the political energy that uh, was encouraged by that kind of pull back now that there are difficulties with making that a reality. But even with those challenges, right? I mean, we have our first, you know, licensed dispensaries in New York, owned and operated by either nonprofit organizations who serve communities most impacted by the war on drugs, or individuals who have direct um, connections and consequences, either they themselves, close family member, parent, etc., with a cannabis conviction during the height of prohibition. And so do we need more? Absolutely. From a market perspective, we got way too many producers, not enough retailers. That's an easy math problem to see.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't want to forget that our farmers are struggling, and they also are I would the hemp program in 2015 here. So uh but I do believe that, even with the challenges, if you kind of look at the early market here in New York, there's just like a great sense of possibility and belief in just what has been accomplished over this last year. That all of our farmers are, by and large, small New York operations in and around upstate New York, and all of our retailers are, folks who can develop a story and a brand identity that really connects meaningfully to the politics of this issue. And when I hear them kind of talk about what it looks like now for them and relate back to those experiences, I think that's all super powerful. And I think it deserves elevation. And I think, again, it can be both inspirational, but I think we can also learn some lessons about how to be restorative, and how to kind of cut against some of the worst of our corporate business practices, while still um, being really successful and
Yeah.
sustainable. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such an exciting time, and it's been really heartening to see all the hard work that everyone's been doing in New York. Here, we've started having a lot of conversations about social equity when I was a co-chair of legalization task force in San Francisco.
Mhm.
But when we look at the barriers to entry into the market, they're still extraordinarily high, and the state wonders why we have a very large, rich, traditional market. But I mean, when you really look at it, there's no mystery around it. You have entrepreneurs and artisans that can't get in work legally in an industry. And quite honestly, some of the best cannabis is coming out of those areas. They should be able to have a legal market, and they can't. It's not that they don't want to, it's that they can't.
I worry about overregulation, and what that does to the ability to access the market, as a producer. I do think, and I think this is very much an East Coast thing, as well. We love to regulate the hell out of something. So we're like, yeah, we're like so legal and progressive, we legalized it, and then you like look, and it's like a 48-page book of detailed regulations, and so coming out of government, like back into the advocacy space, my colleagues, and friends, I should say, at the Office of Cannabis Management won't like to hear me say this, but I think, I I see the market fully realized as, a thriving, legal regulated market where um, we are able to really support the participants at each tier, ensuring those margins are there on an annual basis, much in the way that like the regulation around alcohol makes sure that, mom and pop stores, for better or for worse, can sustain themselves. Um, uh, and um, and that feeding into our community reinvestment fund in New York, the 40% of the tax revenues goes into a fund to be redistributed to communities most impacted by the war on drugs. But I also see that sitting alongside a legacy or informal market. And I want to distinguish between that and the opportunists that we're seeing here in New York, because the storefronts and that are sort of openly flouting the regulatory environment, I think, are very different than the real legacy community. Many of whom, I talk to is kind of post government and go, maybe you want to wait a little bit,
Right.
or just because the other thing too is we know that in my experience as a consumer, right, like I have a relationship with my person, and we do develop that kind of sense of responsibility for their customers and knowledge of their customer base, et cetera, which feels very different than walking into any random of the unlicensed shops that have popped up over the last couple of years, where they're not interested in developing a relationship. They're not interested in sort of being a part of an industry or a community of folks. Is really just taking advantage of this liminal
Yeah.
space opportunity to make a quick buzz.
That was something I'd heard about, but still was extraordinarily surprising when I was there in April. Every corner pretty much had something. And you're right. There's a very distinctive feel about it. Even when you're walking past, you're like, that's not the same as before or what we're trying to do now. And I'm wondering like how much impact that's having on the work that you're doing.
Excuse me. It looms large, and I think it's a confluence of unfortunate factors and timing. We our legalization bill went into effect April 1, 2021.
Hmm.
Um, still very much in the height of early pandemic life, and really commercial spaces having been decimated um, uh, because of the lockdowns and the closures, et cetera. And so, you know, folks with, commercial property very much incentivized to just figure out, how can I get someone in here and get revenue? So much less discerning, much less worried about enforcement, because I would posit the folks just had more important things to worry about. This was a lot was going on in the city, and at that time, and that was just probably not prioritized. So there was, and then of course, we had quite a few months before um, the necessary appointments were made to the agency and the regulatory authority. So there was just this like purgatory where those things kind of came together, and I think um, gave rise to these shops. Folks don't want a heavy-handed enforcement response, because too often the enforcement entities won't distinguish between what we know to be the real legacy folks, and the real folks who are creating all kinds of risk. And it's not just the products that they're putting out, but it's also the lack of um, relationship and connection to the communities that they're in, that creates all kind of public safety risk, robberies, violence, etc. um, and so there's some concern, like we're not in the business of amplifying the scope of law enforcement, but we also, like, on the other side, I think have a duty and responsibility to um, these siblings who have gone out early, gotten licenses, taken advantage of the equity forward provisions, to make sure that um, they can start out on the good foot,
Yeah.
and to consumers. I saw one of the seniors in my neighborhood, and she was about to walk into an unlicensed shop, and I was like, no, 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 right? And so, of course, like, we have to think about um, those folks, particularly more vulnerable in our communities, and what that means for them. Because, to her, she's like, well, this is legal now. And so if I see a shop, I'm making a reasonable presumption as a consumer that it's a legal shop. And we certainly don't want folks to not have at least the knowledge and understanding to be able to make that choice on their own. So uh, that and the length of the rollout and how long some things have taken, I think, are probably the two sort of twin concerns right now in New York.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Almost like the genie's out of the bottle. What's happening now? And actually, like let's talk about On the Revel and
Sure.
Revelry, because that's
Yeah.
I've before we met, I had heard about On the Revel and Revelry,
Well,
and I
that's good.
yeah, and I was like leaning in. I was like, "Ooh, what's this all about? This sounds like some good stuff."
So, On the Revel is a platform that houses a number of different initiatives, all aimed at what we call democratizing access to legal cannabis market information for the communities most impacted by the war on drugs. And our founders, Lulu Sway and Jacoby Holland, come from the sort of tech and entrepreneurial space, respectively.
Hmm.
Jacoby spent time or is from Colorado, and Lulu's from Oregon, but really cut her teeth in the tech and UX space in California. And so they had early experience with legal cannabis markets, and both have really deep New York connections. Jacoby tells a story about how he had an uncle in New York that was ill with cancer, and he would bring cannabis over to him, medicinal cannabis over to him to alleviate his symptoms. And so they met each other. We call them the unlikeliest brother sister pair, and really thought about this idea of how do we know what's coming um, with legalization, right? There's a business, there's an industry coming after that. I was an advocate, right? And so we tell people we know how to legalize it, but we don't know how to commercialize it. Once it's legal, it's on you. Like, and so people like Jacoby and Lulu kind of foresighting this idea that, there was going to be a need for this. We always sort of say the conference industry was male, pale, and stale. And if you have
I love that. Truth.
right, and now if you're inviting someone in by policy to say we want to start with you, like we want to ground this in you, one way to quickly sort of set yourself up for failure is to then not bring them this necessary information, this knowledge, as I mentioned earlier, right? Like closing this knowledge gap in a way, in a manner that like they can receive it. And so it started as the Cannabis Tech Meetup Group in 2017. Gotten way better at branding. Yeah, On the Revel is really a portmanteau of On the Level, which is look like straight up. We're not going to sugarcoat it, and we're going to tell the truth, and bring you the content that you need, and expect you with like the assistance of your siblings to elevate yourself to meet it, but in an environment of revelry. And so I think we feel this unique space where we're not doing anything groundbreaking in terms of building sort of a place for the ecosystem, right? Conferences. Now we've expanded to trade show and an industry night, which is actually tonight, last Wednesday of every month. And draws together the core of what we see as New York cannabis, and that's really these legacy market folks, the small entrepreneurs, the dreamers, the thinkers, the folks who um, were just hungry to bring their creativity and ingenuity to the table. and then having those relationships, out in the early market states, with folks that were able to make sure are here for transformation and not for transaction, and feeling comfortable like bringing those communities together in an ecosystem. So we do Revelry is the conference brand, and we do our Business of Cannabis conference annually. We do a block party, which is both our love letter to the community, but also a way to destigmatize and really educate. And then we do our trade show, which we call Buyers Club, and that is really teaching uh, our early retailers and buyers like how to do that. How do you go to a trade show? How do you start to make those relationships? I would like to say I think we probably facilitated about $30 to $40 million of business at our first Buyers Club, um, and an industry night. So we're gonna keep like growing with the industry too, right? Like as the industry grows, I think our company continues to find ways to facilitate meeting the needs of this ecosystem. So we like to call ourselves the New York Cannabis Clearinghouse. Like we don't have everything you need, but we a good first stop to like get you some good content. You'll be in a welcoming environment. You'll meet some dope people, and I think it's a great launch pad to whatever it is that you might want to like do in this space in New York. So that's how we like to think about ourselves.
I love that. I love that. You know, and just thinking about like the cannabis community and our rich history, I think another thing that we have to have more conversations about, and I totally take it for granted because I started my career in the Castro. So,
Mm-hmm.
we used to joke that we were a bunch of nerdy queerdos that worked in a dispensary. We're working and you know, and we had all these amazing people that would come in, especially like, people like Cleve Jones and Ken Jones would come in. We'd have different, all these different community members that were so impactful, especially with LGBTQ, the community, the history. And so
Yeah.
I always, every year around Pride, when I put things up about cannabis being inherently queer, I always have people saying, "Can you speak more about that?" And I'm always like, "How do you not know? How,
Yeah.
what, where, I don't want to be mean, but where have you been living?" You know?
There there's the relationship. For me, I go back to the uh the early days of the AIDS pandemic and crisis, when I think the government, ignored those realities because of who they were impacting and affecting,
Hmm.
and how folks like Brownie Mary, and um, the folks in the buyers clubs. I mean, part of why we use that terminology even to talk about our trade show, right, is to honor a little bit or nod to that history, showing up for people who were sick and dying, and who the government was saying didn't find worthy enough to even acknowledge
Hmm.
um, the condition that was taking their life. Um, and that demonstrates, like, I think the power of the plan in bridging these communities together, and doing what's right, and what's necessary in the face of um, oppression, prosecution, right, death,
Right. Yeah.
and then I think about the cultural side, right? Like and art, music, fashion, nightlife,
There's no denying it.
right? We outside, and have been, historically. And so that's just like I think just a super, natural connection. Folks creating and kind of getting outside of the paradigms and the kind of singular way of thinking. I think that's been a big part of like queer culture and what it means to be queer, and cannabis and cannabis culture has always, been, fully integrated, I think, into that. And I'm really excited. We have one of my favorite brands in New York, Flamer.
I love
uh,
it.
yeah. Really doing some cool stuff. Queer culture to me is also youth culture, and we have such a great young queer culture here in Brooklyn specifically. It's just where the babies are like doing all their, things, and I can watch them as like Unc from afar now, but just there you feel something really like really special happening with them now, and to think now that there's this new way in which that can be expressed and also the independence. So many queer folks, particularly trans, non-binary folks, experience such high rates of employment discrimination, educational discrimination, and so you see those disparities in, the workforce, the ability to earn, business ownership. And so I think this industry now also like opens up new opportunities to look at new ways to address that, and for better or for worse, financial independence and economic stability makes a big difference in the lives of folks who are marginalized and who suffer discrimination. As a lawyer and advocate who works to dismantle laws, the idea that um, this other piece of myself is also coming at it from a different perspective, and being able to see something more constructive is really special.
Yeah, I feel like the deep queer roots of cannabis is it also has planted the seeds of compassion and really like one of the things that I loved the most about especially working in the Castro was the fact that all were welcome, everyone was accepted as long as you were accepting of other people. And that was like there were a few people that came to work with us that definitely it opened their eyes and their hearts. And there were some people that we were like,
It's not for you.
it's not for you, man.
It's
We'll
not
see
for
you
you.
later. you know?
It's it's great. I mean, so many of our we've gotten to meet so many of our bud tenders and retail employees because our industry nights are really focused on for them, as an opportunity to celebrate, but also to meet one another and network and kind of learn about, okay, what are those next set of opportunities? We have some brands in, they're able to start to learn how to have some of those conversations, and that kind of thing. And one thing that's been really exciting and for me is to see like it feels like a queer party sometimes because there's so many queer people working in the retail space, and also bringing um that energy, both what you talked about, right? Like that compassion, that expectation for how you like you're welcome here, but with that condition, but also just bringing that ingenuity and creativity, and you're kind of seeing it come out in the retail space now. I just met a barista at my coffee shop down the street who is going to be on the founding team of a cannabis coffee shop in the neighborhood. And so we just got into this like, yeah, she's a young queer woman, just bright-eyed and excited about and already, right, like creating, and she's like sharing all these ideas with me, and I was like, no, 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 don't tell me, don't tell anyone, like let make me pay for it in a couple of weeks, right? But
Yes.
just to see like how excited and inspired she was. I know that times are tough, and to think someone who we haven't done great for for our younger generation. We've left them saddled with a lot of student debt and high housing costs and et cetera. And a lot of times it feels like their eyes have been open since birth, and they're kind of like, we're out of it. Like, to see someone with that, but then also be so excited about something, to have found a place. I think that's true for, so many folks, and maybe why, at least here in New York, we're just seeing that confluence between queer folks and queer culture in our emerging cannabis industry.
It's a lot of exciting stuff to look forward to. And I just really, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the work that you do and your team.
Likewise,
Thank
likewise.
you.
It's fun. We are as much a hospitality company as anything else. We have um, most people, we have day jobs, if you will. Revel's a passion project. And it's grown in ways that we feel really great and comfortable with. But that's in large part because it's just a lot of fun. We get to meet so many people and learn so many stories and help people make so many connections. And for me, it's like, what better an honor than to be a bridge builder. And so, yeah, we love our little company. It's a lot of fun. It's a ton of work, but we pour our hearts into it. And so every event, that love is thrown right back on us, which it makes it all worth it. And then we get up the next day and we go, oh my God, how do we do that? Let's do it again. And I think that's our brand, and that's what people have come to know about us. So
I look forward to seeing you grow and doing amazing stuff. And for people who want to keep in contact and see what you're doing, how do they go about doing that?
sure. Well, I would say I am at Jason E. Starr. That is JASONESTARR on all the socials. And definitely check us out at On the Revel, ONTHEREVEL. I would really encourage folks to definitely Instagram to stay up to date with event dates and all of our content. We love to feature brands and retail folks and just elevate folks in the space, but also our YouTube, where we post all of the content from all of our events and conferences. That in and of itself is an encyclopedia of information. And so if you want to really get a feel for our events and the kind of content that we really work to make sure is rigorous and elevated for our community, definitely check out some of our content on YouTube.
Thank you so much. Can we do this again sometime?
I would love to. Talking is one of my favorite things.
Me
And
too.
talking to smart people is one of my favorite things. Yeah, you just are a wealth of knowledge and experience. And I'm really, really grateful that you thought enough of me and what we do to
I so enjoyed our conversation and I was really, really looking forward to it. So I'm glad we were able to make this happen. So
thank you.
I'm looking forward to our future conversations. Thank you so much for joining me
Thank you,
today.
Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, all the listeners out there, too.
And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend. Let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sara Pion on Facebook and Planted with Sara on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsara.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher. Tune in. We are there. So join us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.